What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another edition of Pistons Daily, where you can find daily content covering all things Detroit Pistons, Monday through Friday. As always, I'm your host. My name is Kyle Garrison. I'm over on Twitter at Kyle Garrison2, where I talk all things Detroit sports. So head over there, give me comments, questions, concerns, episode ideas. I'd love to hear from all you guys. Also, shout out to everyone who tunes in every single day. We are on the road to 2,000 subscribers, so if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way to help support the channel. And with that being said, let's jump into a Thursday edition of Pistons Daily. So I apologize for no uploads this week. I have been sick as a dog the past few days and just absolutely down for the count. But it was probably for the better because there's just not much going on in the NBA right now. Needed a little bit of a break considering the lack of just recent news surrounding the Pistons. Just give it a couple days where I can kind of come up with some new information, find some new articles, and I was able to do that. So obviously, first things first, let's talk about our skill of the day. And I just wanted to touch on JD and Ausar playing together at the same time last year. And last year, Jalen Duren, I believe, played just over 3,000 possessions alone. And with Ausar Thompson, they played 1,980 possessions together. And when they were both on the court at the same time, the Pistons allowed 111.7 points per 100 possessions, which was in the 77th percentile in the NBA. And then when JD was on the court alone without Ausar Thompson, the Pistons allowed 118.4 points per 100 possessions, which was in the 24th percentile. So one of the worst clips in the entire league. And that jumped up, obviously, when Ausar came back, and they were a much better overall defensive team. And you can also see when it comes to just opponents' turnovers. When Ausar and JD were on the floor together, 15.5% of opponents' possessions ended in a turnover. When it was just JD on the court, only 14% of opponents' possessions ended in a turnover. And opposing teams' field goal percentage was 57.6%, or effective field goal percentage was 57.6% with just JD on the court. But when both of JD and Ausar were playing together, the opponent's effective field goal percentage dropped to 54.9%. So I know these are very nitpicky stats, but the sample size is large enough to realize just how much better Jalen Duren is defensively when he plays with Ausar Thompson. We saw over a half of a season sample size with them together, and obviously they're going to continue to grow in their own right, especially on the offensive end. But when you're looking at just pure defense, Jalen Duren needs Ausar Thompson on the floor to really truly untap his full potential. We've talked about it, prior on this channel. You can see it when Ausar's on the floor, his help defense, his ability to switch 1 through 4, sometimes even 1 through 5, just helps Jalen Duren kind of focus in on one area where he can be the most effective, and that's just a big-bodied rim presence. But when Ausar Thompson's off the floor, he has to play more help defense, and when he gets off position and when he kind of falters off of his spot defensively, there's just a big decrease in his overall production, and the Pistons were just a much worse defensive team when Jalen Duren was on the floor without Ausar. So overall, I just think it's going to be exciting to see kind of these two guys help create havoc on this defense, because this team predicates themselves on creating turnovers, creating havoc, pushing the break, using their long athletic wings to get down the floor. And in order to do that, you have to be able to create turnovers. You have to be able to maximize your defensive potential. And having Jalen Duren and Ausar Thompson play together does just that. But I do think that a full year sample size, you're going to get Jaden Ivey back. You're going to get some of your athleticism and some of your quickness back on defense. I think both players are going to excel defensively. Obviously, we know what we have in Ausar. He's going to be incredible, but I'm mostly just speaking on Jalen Duren and the fact that he is due for an extension. So the Pistons want proof of concept that he can be a above average defender in the NBA at the center position, because the Pistons do need that. They have Isaiah Stewart, but Jalen Duren, what he brings offensively is just much higher than what Isaiah Stewart brings. So if you can have two very solid defensive bigs kind of playing off of one another like Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren, that's very, very hard for opposing teams to prepare for, because all 48 minutes you're going to have a very solid defensive center. And again, that's very, very hard to prepare for. It's hard for opposing centers and opposing just offenses to kind of scheme around. And I do think that Jalen Duren has a pretty high defensive upside. He's still very young, and there's a lot to tap into. And I think having Ausar next to him is going to help that kind of come to fruition, like I predicted and a lot of people around the Pistons community have also predicted. But that kind of brings me into my next topic when we're talking about who's playing on the court at the same time, whether or not the lineups are going to look similar to last year or not with the losses of Dennis and Tim Hardaway Jr. and Malik Beasley, and just kind of what some of these on-the-fly lineups are going to look like. And that kind of brings me to a YouTuber that I really, really enjoy. His name is Six Rings of Steel, Sross. His podcast is Just Ballin' Podcast. He does NFL, he does NBA content, and those are kind of my two favorite leagues. I love football, I love basketball. So he just puts out a ton of intriguing videos, especially when the offseason's slow. He's always asking for hot takes or overreactions, etc. on Twitter, and I like to give him prompts just based on the Lions and the Pistons, because those are my two favorite professional sports teams. And the prompt that he had on Twitter the other day, or X, he just asked for every NBA team's best or most intriguing lineup for their favorite team. So I gave mine. I said Cade, Jaden Ivey, Ausar Thompson, Ron Holland, and Jalen Duren. And the reason I said those five is because that's your young core. Those are the guys you've drafted in the lottery over the last 5 years, and that's kind of who you want to see pan out going into the future, especially adding Ron Holland to that lineup. Trajan Langdon's lone first overall draft pick. He hasn't had any first rounders in his 2 years besides Ron Holland, so he's going to be a key focal point of this team going forward, especially his development from three-point line. And Matt, Six Rings of Steels, he didn't quite agree with this lineup just due to the lack of spacing overall. And that's not really why I said that lineup. I mostly just did it because I think it's very intriguing. I think it'd be fun. The athleticism would be unbelievable. But yes, there would be a definite lack of spacing. We know Ron Holland is working on his three-point shot, but he's not quite there. Jaden Ivey, the question marks surrounding his three-point shot really are, what is kind of holding this team back right now. Again, he was unbelievable last year, so I don't want to say that he can't come back and be a 41% shooter, but I'm just not going to bank on it right now. I do expect a little bit of a dip in overall efficiency, especially because I think his total shot output from three-point line is going to increase just with the loss of Tim Hardaway Jr. and Malik Beasley. So they're going to be much more reliant on Jaden Ivey's three-point ability, so he might get a little bit more just overall pressure defensively when he's especially above the break, because he was unbelievable from the top of the key last year when he was shooting threes. So I do expect defenses to kind of key in on that a little bit more this year, especially again with the only other really three-point shooter that is an off-ball three-point shooter in the lineup is Tobias Harris maybe. So there's going to have to be just a little bit of creativity on Trajan Langdon's side. But when talking about this video and this specific YouTuber, Six Rings of Steel, his most intriguing lineup for this team was Cade, Jaden Ivey, Duncan Robinson at the 3, Ausar Thompson moving down to the 4, and Jalen Duren at the 5. And I think this is very, very intriguing. I do like this upside offensively. I think that I've talked about Duncan Robinson and Jalen Duren being able to kind of play off of each other, similar to what Duncan and Bam Adebayo did in Miami the past few years. So I do think that this could be a very fun lineup, especially if Jaden Ivey can be a good 38-39% three-point shooter. You add a guy like Duncan Robinson, who's one of the best spot-up movement shooters in the entire NBA, and that's going to pair very well with the athleticism of Ausar, the athleticism of Jalen Duren, the playmaking ability of Cade Cunningham, the downhill attacking ability of both Cade and Jaden Ivey. You put a shooter like Duncan Robinson in the corner, that causes so much havoc for the opposing defenses. They have to key in on him, and that could be very, very fun to watch. That could really untap the offensive potential of really everybody in this lineup. So I do agree with Matt. I think this is a very, very solid lineup for the Pistons. I expect to see this game one. I expect to see this exact 5 on the floor at the same time. Maybe you throw in Karis LeVert as that 2 guard, or you throw Karis LeVert and Jaden Ivey as that 1 and 2. We'll just have to see kind of how overall that plays out, but I think it'd be very fun to see kind of Duncan Robinson coming off of the bench first, kind of taking Tobias Harris off the floor. You move Ausar to that 4 position, and then you allow that 5 to run. Then you throw Ron Holland in for that backup power forward. You keep Duncan Robinson on the floor. You allow Jaden Ivey and Karis, or like I mentioned, Cade and Karis out there. And that could be very, very fun and just allow for a lot of floor spacing that is kind of the biggest question mark surrounding this team. Then again, if you add Malik Beasley back into this lineup, it completely changes things. We're looking at an entirely new offense. We're looking at one of the best floor spacing offenses in the entire NBA compared to right now, which you're looking at one of the worst. So it's going to be all up in the air, all determined on just the development of the young core and whether or not you get Malik Beasley back. But again, we're not banking on Malik. We're going to have to see if he does return, if he's allowed to make a return, and if that's even on the Pistons. So not going to count that as a guaranteed yet, and we're definitely going to have to see that play out. But let me know your guys' just most intriguing lineup this year, if it's the current projected starters, or if you'd like to see a different combination that we really haven't seen before from this group. But moving on, HoopsHype, Frank Urbina over at HoopsHype, he dropped his just center rankings. And I know I've talked about the athletic center rankings and where Jalen Duren lies, but I wanted to just touch on his because he has Jalen Duren coming in at 17. And I'll just read the reasoning behind having Jalen Duren this low. He writes, Detroit Pistons center Jalen Duren possesses a ridiculous mix of size, strength, length, and explosiveness, at times looking like a modern-day Alonzo Mourning, just without any of the shooting ability or post-up game. The same thing that limits a lot of players in this part of their ranking limits Duren, and that's his total lack of range as a scorer. Duren is basically just a play finisher near the basket on offense, though his stout screen setting and his danger as a lob threat do give his presence gravity and open up looks for teammates. With modern star centers expected to do so much outside scoring, ball handling, and playmaking, do we think Duren can reach that all-NBA level strata? Probably not, and if it does happen, it won't be for a while. But nevertheless, he's an impactful presence and a threat on both ends of the floor. So he's got players such as Isaiah Hartenstein, Naz Reid, Kristaps Porzingis, Nikola Vucevic, and Miles Turner ahead of him, and Chet Holmgren and Rudy Gobert, and some more proven players, Jared Allen, Bam Adebayo, and some guys who have kind of developed more of an outside rangy game. And then you've got defensive juggernauts like Jared Allen and Rudy Gobert ahead of him. But I think it's pretty fair to rank Jalen Duren as 17. Like he mentioned, just at this stage of his career with his youth, he has yet to develop just an outside scoring presence. I do think the facilitating and playmaking is coming along, and we're going to really see that break out this year. But again, we'll have to see the proof kind of come to form, and we're going to have to actually see it play out over a decent sample size to be comfortable to say that Jalen Duren is a very good passer. Because we saw a little bit in spurts in the playoffs last year, but again, very small sample size, only 6 games. So if he can continue to push that into this year, then we are going to be looking at a guy who could be in the top 12 by the end of next season. Because again, guys like Naz Reid, yes, Naz Reid can shoot, but Jalen Duren is a much better rim presence than Naz Reid. He's a true physical center. Naz Reid is kind of more moonlights at that power forward position and kind of is a backup right now. Jalen Duren is the bona fide starter in this lineup. So you also look at guys like Isaiah Hartenstein, who's more of a backup. He's a very good rim presence, but Jalen Duren is a much better finisher at the rim. He's a much better lob threat, more athletic, younger. Same with guys like Kristaps Porzingis. Kristaps Porzingis, I have a stat here. He has played over 60 games twice in his entire career. So that's a big if. There's a lot of big ifs surrounding Kristaps Porzingis. So we could be talking about Jalen Duren surpassing Kristaps if he is only able to play half the games. And again, Jalen Duren has to stay healthy, but he has so far in his career. And I expect him to again this year because, again, the Pistons have a great backup center in Isaiah Stewart. So he isn't going to be relied on to play 35 minutes a night. He's going to be able to play 28 to 32 minutes just depending on foul trouble and just what this team needs. And if they do need that defensive spark, Isaiah Stewart can come in. But I do like the fact that Jalen Duren has a backup option next to him because he is very young and there are some holes in his games that kind of come to light and that defense is exposed or that opposing teams expose on both ends of the floor. But even more so when you're talking about guys like Nikola Vucevic. He is a guy who has had some injury history, and we don't really know what the Bulls' plan is going forward. They're kind of stuck in NBA lottery purgatory. They're right on the cusp of being a play-in team, of being a lottery team every year. And so he could be on the move. He could also have a more limited role this year if they are trying to kind of tank for a higher pick. But then when you get into, like I mentioned, Miles Turner, Chet Holmgren, Rudy Gobert, I think that is very fair to say that Jalen Duren is behind those guys. And I'd expect going into next year, he'd still be behind those guys, but I think 13 or 12 or 11 could be very, very fair. Again, we're just going to have to see kind of what his development looks like and if he can become a much improved defender. But let me know in the comments if you think that Jalen Duren is the 17th ranked center in the NBA, if you think he's higher, if he's lower, or just what he needs to do overall to kind of get into that top 15, top 12 range. And then the last topic before we wrap up the show is ESPN dropped their biggest roster holes for every team this season, and the Pistons was sure ball handling. I can't remember who wrote this. This is Kevin Pelton over at ESPN, and he writes, the Pistons ranked 21st in turnover rate last season ahead of just two playoff teams, the Clippers and the Grizzlies, then lost one of their most sure-handed ball handlers in Dennis Schroeder, who had 4.2 assists to turnover ratio with the Detroit Pistons, which is, I did not know that. That's unbelievable. So shout out Dennis Schroeder. With Jaden Ivey penciled in as backup point guard, my showing projection system pegs the Pistons for the second worst turnover rate in the NBA. And that's not great. That is definitely something we've talked about on the show, that there is going to be a kind of lack of secondary ball handlers. But again, we got Caris LeVert. Jaden Ivey is going to step into that role. And I know that losing Dennis Schroeder, who just won Eurobasket MVP, is going to be a big loss. So, shout out to him for that. But I also genuinely don't think that the Pistons wanted to pay him as much as he wanted. He wanted $14.5 million per year. The Pistons were not willing to give that to him. They wanted a smaller, more short-term deal with Caris LeVert, so they gave it to him. They also probably wanted somebody who wasn't as limited as Dennis Schroeder. He's a backup point guard. He's not a backup shooting guard. He's not a backup small forward. And Caris LeVert can kind of come in, and he can definitely play the 1 and the 2. And if you do really need him to play the 3, and you want to see him next to Cade and Jaden Ivey, that's an option at some times. And then you can have a Tobias Harris and Jalen Duren front court, so you're not losing that much size because Caris LeVert is 6'6", and Dennis Schroeder is 6 foot. So if Caris LeVert can even offer you a 3 assist to turnover ratio instead of 4 like Dennis Schroeder, then I do think this team, they might still be in the 20s in terms of turnover rate overall, just because Cade Cunningham does rely on the ball in his hands and his usage rate is very high, so turnovers will come. But again, I do think that this team kind of replaced some of what they lost in terms of overall ball handling. And I think it's going to kind of just be predicated on what Cade Cunningham can do, how he is able to just overall improve his ability to take care of the ball. That's a big thing we've talked about on the show. One of the things that's going to get him to be that in that top 10 and be considered, a perennial superstar and a perennial all-NBA guy is if he cuts down those turnovers, which again, I think that he will this year. He was very, very high up there, around 4.5 a game, and I don't see that being the case this year. I think Jaden Ivey will help with that. I think Caris will help with that, and there's going to just be some more overall thought that goes into what JB Bickerstaff does offensively in order to cut down those turnovers. But then again, we'll have to see it come to fruition. Only time will tell. We'll get a good, solid sample size of that in the next coming months. And if there is some big holes, they can go out in during the trade deadline and kind of make a similar move to what they made last year and get a Dennis Schroeder type player who can take some of that ball handling pressure off of Cade and Jaden Ivey. But let me know in the comments if you think the Pistons' biggest weakness is lack of ball handling, or is there another area of the game you'd like to see the Pistons improve on? Maybe it's the floor spacing, three-point shooting overall, bench depth, something like that, that you're just looking forward to seeing the Pistons improve on this year. But that's all I've got for you guys today on a Thursday edition of Pistons Daily. As always, like, subscribe, comment, turn on post notifications, and follow me on Twitter at Kyle Garrison too. As always, head over to Spotify, leave a review and a follow if you can. And once again, thank you all so much for tuning in every single day. With that being said, that is going to do it here for episode 64 of Pistons Daily, and I will catch you all next time.